The court considers that, in conformity with its obligations under the Genocide Convention, Israel must immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah governorate which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part.
That was video right there from earlier today where the International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to immediately halt their military offensive on Rafah, where it has already begun, and far more than 1 million Palestinians have fled to that area, trying to dodge the chaos that has occupied so much of Gaza following months of the war. This court order from the Court of Justice is connected to a story we talked about just a couple of months ago involving South Africa and accusations of genocide against Israel. That criminal inquiry is going to take a very long time to finalize. We don't know when we're going to have a final word on that. But in the meantime, South Africa has pressured the court to do something while the court proceeds. And this announcement by the ICJ has sort of three main components. So the first is, as we said, ordering a halt to the military offensive in Rafah. The second part is access to Gaza for war crimes investigators. And also a big and immediate increase of humanitarian aid to the region, parts of which are enduring famine, as most of you probably know and have been for a number of months. Top UN court cited an immediate risk to Palestinians, noting that more than 800,000 people have been forced to flee Rafah since Israeli forces began ground operations in the area. It had once been declared a safe zone. And if you recall sort of the main thrust of the conflict, you had it sort of sweeping from north to south throughout Gaza. And at every step along the way, people were told, go south, go south, go south. It'll be safe. There's a safe zone. And then the safe zone becomes the war zone a few weeks or a month later. And then you're told to go south again. Well, that reached, I guess, its apex when sort of the last holdout in the south became the hottest point of the war. And now many are having to flee back into areas where half or more of the structures have been destroyed. The critical infrastructure is gone. Access to clean water, medication, electricity, and certainly food is at an all-time low. So that's the situation the ICJ is pushing to try to provide a little bit of relief from that situation. We're gonna have a debate in just a little bit, or a discussion about what effect we think this ruling will actually have. But Cenk, I wanna toss to you, what do you make of the ICJ's ruling?
Pausing here to deliver some honest truth, as we do in our news coverage as well. TYT is facing challenges, guys, as the entire industry is. You know who could make the difference? You. If you hit the join button below, it's gonna make all the difference and keep us in business. We appreciate you, thank you.
So honestly, it's kind of obvious. So it's obvious to the world. That's part of the reason why they're doing this ruling. The only place on planet Earth where it's not obvious are two places. Well, let's say three to be a little bit more accurate. One is Israel itself, like where they think like they're so blinded by their rage and the different cultural context that Israel is in right now that they think that they're the victims, and doing 30 times what happened on October 7th is not enough. It has to be 50 or 60, and they believe this mythology that Netanyahu is actually trying to get Hamas, and golly gee, if they just get Hamas, they'll stop, and etc. So in Israel itself, they believe that madness that isn't remotely true. They believe the second place is Washington, D.C., where almost everyone there at least pretends to believe this nonsense. And the third place is cable news. But outside of those three tiny pockets, which are of course incredibly influential, everyone else on planet Earth knows you gotta stop. And it's not just for the Palestinians' sake, it's for Israel's sake. I mean, even allies of Israel are looking around going, are you guys serious? You're gonna keep killing thousands of more innocent civilians? You don't think you've destroyed Gaza enough? Like, no one on earth can think that unless they're totally blinded by bias, right? And that's part of why we've had the three European countries, Spain, Norway, and was it France, I think?
The recognition?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, Ireland, Spain, Norway, and Ireland now saying enough. We recognize Palestine, and I think that's exactly right. I think what the International Criminal Court of Justice is doing is exactly right. Whether it'll have an effect is, of course, a different question, and one we'll talk about in a second. But Brian, what do you think?
You know, I am each morning driven to tears watching this and reading about it. Each morning, it is like a just absolute like, dark black hole of just sadness. And I wonder why we can't essentially put some sort of United Nations peacekeeping force or some kind of global presence in place now to stop all of this, because there are two crusades happening and they're unending, and it is, the result is annihilation, and it's just horrific to watch. I mean, I watched this morning a first-person account that was sort of a video testimonial in the New York Times about a family trying to get across the border into Egypt. Now they're paying essentially coyotes to take people across the border because the border entrance is closed. And so they're paying these exorbitant fees now. They're leaving behind family members. People are basically just trying to get their kids to safety. We're watching this just horrific thing day by day unfold. And we lack so much sense of justice in our world that we can't pull together some kind of force through United Nations, NATO, I don't care, just something to just stop it. Why? Yeah. I mean, you guys are smarter than I am. So but I'm just horrified by it every day.
Yeah, on behalf of John, agree to disagree on us being smarter, but yes, your point is indisputable. And but yet America does nothing. They built a pier. By the way, it cost us $500 million to build a pier to get the Palestinians food, because Israel is effectively blocking all other entrances by slowing things down so much that that's what's led to the starvation. So our so-called ally says, why don't you go spend $500 million to try to feed these guys that we're trying to starve? Okay, but we're not gonna let things go into the point where they could just eat like normal human beings. Gee, I wonder if the International Court of Justice should do something about it. Of course they should do something about it. In fact, if they don't do something about this, they might as well pack up and say, yeah, this is just a political body and we're useless. So it would be maniacal if they didn't do what they did today.
I mean, just from a pure sort of PR perspective, the President Biden is so unable to articulate a consistent American policy and echo it and repeat it daily. It's being filled by a vacuum of like other people, like Donald Trump, and it's turning into now this completely confusing madness where it's turned into now just a political thing in the United States as opposed to this humanitarian crisis. And I lament that someone can't be bold enough and big enough who actually works in the federal government of the United States and represents the country to articulate a strategy to end it.
Yeah, it's utterly devastating. Like the human mind has like remarkable capacity to take two things that are the same and to think of them in two very different ways. Like you can see the death of a civilian and you can see the death of another civilian, and based on where they were born, one has value and the other doesn't. It's just that's how people see it. People would never admit it. Many wouldn't even think that it applies to them, but it clearly does. If hostility broke out, full hostility, war between Iran and Israel, and Iran invaded and took control of a section of Israel and did a blockade like this and was starving people there, it would be utterly unacceptable. I'm saying that both as a hypothetical and also as a statement of my values. It would be unacceptable and everyone would agree that it was unacceptable. But in this case, some people agree a little bit.
Let me ask you guys this. What do you think the way cable news is treating this story that is a 24/7 unfolding, unmitigated catastrophe, and what we get on our menu of cable television in terms of what stories we hear, when we hear them, duration of those stories, and the depth of those stories? What do you think?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Brian. I think that I got used to, speaking of blockades, an entire mainstream media blockade of anything positive about Palestinians, treating them as human beings, viewing them as human, thinking that they might have a decent point when they shouldn't be occupied, etc. Israel's 100% right about everything, no matter how absurd, right? That was the state of affairs before this particular siege of Gaza. And so I'm encouraged to see that blockade has been broken. New York Times has had some great pieces. CNN has had some great pieces. Every once in a while, MSNBC allows a Muslim commentator on, one of their own reporters or anchors, to say the truth. So Fox News has no truth, but that's Tuesday. They don't have any truth on anything, right? But that being said, we're thrilled that we got an exception to the rule. But the overall rule, especially when it came to the campus protests, and that's part of why I was so upset about the campus protests, because they went back to the bad old days of 100% propaganda. The peace protesters are the violent ones. It was 100% Orwellian. Peace is war, war is peace. The protesters aren't good people trying to prevent the deaths of innocent women and children. They're horrible anti-Semites. They might have tails and horns. They should all be arrested and locked up. So still, I would say 90% of American media is awful and pretty much pure propaganda on this. But the 10% has been a boon, a wonderful surprise that it's actually made it on air. That somewhat accurate coverage. And of course, when that 10% breaks out, the propaganda side loses their mind. And they're like, how dare you treat them as human beings? How dare you report things that are true? Well, every news organization, every human rights organization totally, utterly agrees. No, they're all anti-Semites. So to me, I don't know what your guys' perspective is. That propaganda is still 85 to 90% of American media. But at least, thank God, there's a little bit of ray of truth coming in. And I think that the reason that's happening, Brian, is because social media. Social media has the actual truth, and they're trying to compete. And in their competition, they're getting a little embarrassed at how wall-to-wall the propaganda was in favor of Israel. So now, and younger reporters, younger people in all these organizations, and again, irrespective of religion or ethnic background, they're all saying, no, guys, we're supposed to be in the news business. That's the load of crap you guys sold us in journalism school. And you're obviously not doing news. That's why I think we're having 15% reality, if I'm being generous. John, I'm curious what your take on it is.
Yeah, I think that, especially in regard to the massive death of civilians, I think that the numbers became such that the media could not address it in the exact same way that they would in prior incursions, where you have 500 dead Palestinians, 1,000 dead Palestinians. In this case, it was like, okay, we got to do something. This is clearly unacceptable. I do agree that the beginning of the campus protests allowed them to pivot to what they're more comfortable with, which is pitching all of this as only the province of extremists. And in particular, they did their trick where they take the protests and they listen to what the protesters say they're protesting for, and then they say, no, that's not actually it. The protesters say, we want an end to the war, we want a ceasefire. Some of them just say, we want to be able to protest without being utterly crushed by the police state. And the media is like, okay, you love Hamas, got it. They're pro-terrorism, and it's one of the most utterly condescending things that the media does. They do it in most protest movements, and they've done it very effectively in this one. And they've been aided, by the way, by a lot of notable celebrities that have been perfectly willing to step up and smear and tar these students, none of which they will ever speak to or have any interest in speaking to. So that part of it, I have not enjoyed.
Brian, what's your take on it?
I mean, you touched on something, you touched on this phrase from news in my old news days too. We used to call wall-to-wall coverage. And cable news has nothing but time. I'm always amused by it. You did it at MSNBC. I did it at MSNBC too. And there was always this rush to finish a story so we could get to a commercial. One of the most popular, we're running out of time. Thank you so much for being here. And I just don't understand why anyone is running out of time on cable news, because it's on for 24 hours a day. And there's really no reason to rush off ever for anything. But what gets wall-to-wall coverage is the Trump trial in New York. But what's going on is an unfolding humanitarian crisis, catastrophe, moment by moment, gets an update. So it's like an update in the morning and an update at night. Kind of reminds me of the old evening news programs where you actually sat around and waited till like 5:30 or 6 o'clock for Walter Cronkite, or I think they still do it. Nora O'Donnell does it on one of those channels. I think it's called CBS. but they give you like 2.5 tape packages are never longer than 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Anything longer than that in network news is sacrilege. I worked in network news. I know your package is too long. Can we cut this? Can we cut this? I just don't understand why we just never have enough time. And I think real time, real wall-to-wall coverage of the crisis would actually be informative and more nuanced and allow people to really, really connect with what is a crisis, as opposed to it's that thing again for 2 minutes on Morning Joe, or that 4 minutes on PBS or whatever, wherever it's airing. We're just treating it again like it's becoming like the Vietnam War. It's like, here's your dose of it. Here's what happened today. We're moving on now.
Yeah, I think I can partially explain it. Generally, content about it doesn't draw much attention.
Yeah,
I know that in my own experience. I know I was just recently looking at, I don't generally watch like MSNBC on YouTube, but I was going over the stuff they do, and I was noticing like they'll do something about the trial or whatever, and it'll get 75,000 views, 150,000 views, and then there will be a thing about Gaza, and it's like literally like 4,000. And you can see that peppered throughout, and like they see that, they know that people aren't paying as much attention, and that's going to affect them after a while.
But I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, John, because our videos on Gaza get plenty of views. I think that the reason their views on Gaza coverage is getting 4,000, in other words, really, really small, is because nobody wants to watch NBC's propaganda about Gaza. Like they're gonna tell you that Israel's 100% right, et cetera, et cetera. So like, what's the point of watching that video? Like if you had an expectation that they're gonna give honest coverage like we do, right? We give you, like, here's what Hamas is 100% wrong about. Here's the BS that side says, and here's what Israel's wrong about. I mean, here's what Israel is definitely wrong about is a sentence that has never been spoken on cable news, unless I said it once while I was on MSNBC. Okay, so look, last thing here is this ICJ, order going to affect Israel at all? I'm gonna quote 2 members here, and by the way, get involved in the show. Be a member. We read your comments. You're part of the show. We'll put the link down below, as we always do in the description box, tyt.com/team. Funkin' for Fun wrote in, history will ask, what did you do to try to stop it? And that's how, Brian mentioned earlier how he wakes up every morning. That's how I wake up every morning, thinking, what did I do to try to stop this? And how much more can I try? Because every day more people die, tons of more innocent civilians die. And then lastly, Art Guy wrote in, even if Israel were to stop now, their international reputation is completely ruined for years to come. Yeah, I agree with that. But you know what's gonna make it way worse, not years to come, but decades to come, is if they obliterate Rafah. And at which point I think it's gonna be unrecoverable. So I can say 2,000 times over afterwards why, if they get to a peace deal, for example, why the Jewish state is great and no problem, and we should all go into tourism, and and it's a beautiful country, etc. But if they obliterate Rafah, and this is most important, and they try to drive out the Palestinians into the desert, as Ben Gvir and Smotrich want to do, it's going to be totally unrecoverable. And so I don't want that for Israel, let alone the poor, poor Palestinians.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.